Now here again is Eugene Sutton. Canon Sutton, that was
Yes.
a provocative message and gets us to wonder about the question you posed at the beginning of your message. Who are you and what are you called to become? I'm going to turn it around and ask you to answer it.
Yeah.
What would you say to that question personally?
Well, personally, and I get to say this being very excited, I am canon pastor of the National Cathedral, and that's very exciting work. I get to help build a community of people around the country who want to nurture their spirituality and in tune with the cathedral's spirituality around prayer and study and action, no matter what church they belong to. But as exciting as my job is, it's just one particular job or a ministry. What I'm really excited about is my vocation, and that's the calling to proclaim good news everywhere. As long as I'm committed to my vocation, it doesn't matter where I exercise it, whether I'm at the National Cathedral or at a small church, or if I'm retired and I'm just at home and doing things in my community. Always what follows me is proclaim good news. What's bad, what's broken here, and what's the good news here? That's my vocation.
Do you think we get caught up or intimidated by this idea of calling? You intimated this a little bit, that it's got to be big and religious in some sense.
Yes.
Why do we struggle with that and get in our own way, I guess?
Well, I think one of the reasons we struggle with it is because of, frankly, television, movies.
Okay.
So often when there's a big moment, when someone gets a message from God, the music swells, the light is ablaze, and there may be an angel there blaring a message, you are called to do this or that. But in the scriptures and in our tradition, God rarely comes that way. More often, God comes to us in a quiet way. Perhaps as 1 Kings 19 in the Old Testament said, in a still small voice. And so I think it can confuse people if they don't hear big blaring messages. I think it's more the daily being accessible to God in prayer.
What has inspired your own journey, your purpose in life, if you will? What were some of the beginnings?
Oh, well, one of the great beginnings, of course, in my family of being raised in the church. I was raised a Baptist, and now I'm an Episcopalian. In a way, I'm an Episcopal Baptist. Well, the great influence of my family, my grandparents, my mother and father, and all of that. In high school, though, I was troubled at 17 years old, and I wasn't sure if there was a God, and how could people even know that God was speaking, if God was. And I went to a musical concert, and there at that concert, someone sang a song, a gospel song, that was simply, God gave me a song that the angels could not sing. And the singer was so joyous and so assured in her faith, and I remembered thinking, I would just love to have that assurance. And God answered my prayer just right then and there. Music helped
touches the spots of our soul.
And I think all the arts do. A good piece of theater or a good piece of music, or you go to an art museum and you see this beauty, or you go out in nature. These are also texts, I believe, that God writes, not only the scriptures, but in the scripture of nature, all pointing to this divine purpose.
When we understand our calling better, Eugene, do you think there's a sense that we feel more in sync on a daily basis, that there's more of a flow in our life? And I wonder if people are afraid of that feeling sometimes, if it's just unnatural because we're constantly trying to shift and move and deal with all that life throws at us.
Well, I think it anchors us, the vocation and the calling does, because frankly, we have good days and we have bad days, and sometimes we think that God is very far away. That may be when God is the closest. And sometimes when we're so very sure that God is behind us and God is giving us messages is when we need to get quiet, and maybe we're not as close to God as we need to be. But when one is sure about one's vocation, then you can ride out the ups and downs of life because you know you're headed somewhere. I might say one other thing. I'm not sure that we can discern our vocations much before the sunny side of age 40. I had an inkling of what mine could be at the age of 23 when I entered seminary. But it actually took 20 years of doing the acts of ministry before I could say with confidence, this is my calling, this is my vocation in life. Similarly for my father, I don't think he would say, I'm a fixer, but I think maybe now as he's approaching 80 years old, he can look at his life and he can see the great theme and he knows that's my vocation.
We need to name your dad. He sounds wonderful. What is his name?
James Sutton. Oh. James and Eileen Sutton are my parents in Washington, and I obviously owe them much.
Oh, that's
and
terrific.
And my family figures a lot into my preaching as well as my spirituality.
That's very, very clear.
Yeah.
I must ask you about the Frederick Buechner quote that
yes.
you gave in your message. The place that God calls us to be is the place where your deep gladness and
the world's deep hunger meet.
Now, how did that get revealed to you personally?
Well, for me, it's relatively easy. You may gather that one of my deep gladnesses is to communicate.
That's right.
is to speak. And I was raised in a culture, you know, African American culture is very expressive, and we were encouraged in churches to say what our faith is and to sing it and to even express it in a physical way. So that's one of my deep gladnesses. When I am helping people, when I'm communicating something about the goodness of God, I am in my element. And I'm never happier than to be with a group of people and they are praying. Now, I also believe that that's where the world's deep hunger is. What we believe as people of faith is that even though we may pray to God for specific and particular things, what we are really hungering for is the presence of God and God acting on our behalf and saying, this has purpose, this has meaning. That is the world's deep hunger. At least in my eyes, and I get to help meet it.
Before we go, Eugene, can you speak a little bit about centering prayer as an authority? Where's the value that comes from that you see in these retreats that you lead?
Yes, and we do have people, thousands of people now have come from around the country to the National Cathedral as one of the places where they can learn centering prayer and do it in community. They make pilgrimage to the cathedral, and we encourage people to do that.
What is it?
Centering prayer is just an offering to God beyond thoughts, beyond words, beyond desires. Its only intention is to consent to God's presence and action within. Somebody once asked Mother Teresa, when you pray, what do you say? And she said, I say nothing, I just listen. And then they asked her, well, what is God saying? She said, he says nothing, he just listens. In that listening, you to the heart of God, God listening to your heart. In that listening, truth and grace and love and goodness abound. So centering prayer is a way to help you to listen, not for voices, but for an awakening for God in your life.
And so what form does that take for you in your daily prayer?
Well, I begin my day, and I should say most days, with going to the Center for Prayer and Pilgrimage at Washington National Cathedral. That is a wonderful place for me to begin my day in silence and with eyes closed and with letting go of all the other cares of the world. I simply, for 20 minutes as we teach, say yes to God, and God, show me the way today.
Eugene, thank you for joining us today.